Rows of identical brick flats stretched across landscapes that once held Victorian slums. Council estates became home to millions of working-class British families, places where childhoods unfolded between communal stairwells and concrete playgrounds. These were worlds unto themselves, with their own rhythms, rules, and memories that shaped an entire generation. Families moved into their council flats with cautious optimism after years of rationing and bomb shelters. The walls were clean, the windows intact, and for the first time, many had indoor plumbing and their own front door. Mothers hung curtains in bedrooms that didn't have to be shared with extended family, while fathers marveled at kitchens with actual counters. The estates rose from wartime rubble, concrete monuments to a government promise that decent housing was a right, not a privilege. Children claimed the new spaces immediately, their voices echoing through stairwells that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The balconies became stages for games spanning multiple floors, and green spaces between blocks transformed into football pitches marked by jumpers for goalposts. Everything felt enormous and full of potential, like the future had finally arrived. Neighbours introduced themselves with cups of tea and nervous smiles, forming communities that would endure for decades. Yet beneath the excitement lived a quiet adjustment. Elderly residents missed their terraced houses with backyard gardens, however cramped. The estates prioritised function over the familiar rhythms of street life, where you could chat from your doorstep. Still, most believed they'd made a fair trade, swapping charm for comfort, history for hygiene. Communal laundry rooms hummed with gossip, women timing their washing to coincide with friends' schedules. Conversations ranged from children's report cards to troubles with husbands, advice flowing as freely as soap suds. These rooms held secrets and celebrations, witnesses to the full spectrum of working-class life. Women formed alliances that would support them through pregnancies, bereavements, and the endless challenge of making ends meet. Stairwells served as corridors where you couldn't avoid neighbours even if you wanted to. Children played endless games of tag, their footsteps thundering until someone shouted from behind a door. The walls were thin enough that everyone knew everyone else's business: who was rowing, which family had the telly too loud, who was behind on rent. This lack of privacy could feel suffocating, but it also meant help was never far away. The lift became a peculiar space of forced intimacy and occasional danger. Teenagers commandeered lifts for clandestine meetings, covering walls with graffiti declarations of love. Mothers with prams dreaded the frequent breakdowns that meant hauling shopping up 8 flights of stairs. The smell inside was distinctive disinfectant, cigarette smoke, and something indefinably urban that clung to your clothes. Mornings arrived with the clatter of milk bottles, their musical chime marking the day's start. Fathers left for factory shifts before dawn, their footsteps heavy on concrete walkways, lunch tins rattling. By 8 o'clock, playgrounds filled with smaller children, their mothers watching from benches while trading cigarettes and conversation. The rhythm was predictable, comforting in its regularity, marking time by shifts and school bells. Afternoons belonged to a different energy. Older women hung washing on communal lines, sheets snapping like flags in the wind. Teenagers drifted home from school, gathering in stairwells or on street corners. The ice cream van's cheerful tune signaled afternoon excitement, drawing children from every floor with coins clutched in sweaty palms. Mothers leaned from balconies to check on their kids, voices carrying across courtyards. Evenings transformed the estate as lights flickered on in hundreds of windows. Families gathered around dinner tables in flats stacked like beehives, each containing their own small dramas. The blue glow of television sets became the estate's nightlight, flickering in synchronized patterns. Fathers returned from evening shifts at the pub, their voices raised in song or argument depending on the night. Estate children created elaborate worlds from sparse materials around them. Stairwells became castles under siege, balconies turned into pirate ships, and flat roofs became secret bases. Every corner held potential for adventure, from bins where you might find treasures to basements requiring real courage to explore. Gangs formed from geography, your block against theirs, with football matches serving as primary battlefields. The lack of gardens meant claiming public space through sheer presence and creativity. Danger lurked in forms parents couldn't entirely prevent. Open balconies on upper floors became stages for risky play, children balancing on railings, climbing where they shouldn't. The estate's design hadn't fully considered children's needs, creating hazards normalized through familiarity. Broken glass glittered in play areas, and communal spaces showed signs of neglect as maintenance budgets shrank. Children adapted, learning which areas to avoid and which risks were worth taking. Games evolved with seasons and the estate's unique geography. Kirby required a quiet road between blocks. Knockdown Ginger capitalized on endless rows of doorways. Older children taught younger ones unwritten rules about which caretakers would chase you off and which elderly residents offered biscuits if they caught you. The estate became a sprawling classroom for lessons about community and survival that no school could teach. Kitchens became workshops of resourcefulness, where women performed daily miracles with limited budgets. Monday's roast chicken became Tuesday's soup and Wednesday's sandwich filling, nothing wasted, every scrap transformed. The art of stretching a pound note required creativity. Potatoes featured in every meal. Bread filled hungry bellies. Treats were rationed with mathematical precision. Mothers swapped recipes, maximizing cheap cuts, turning offal into delicacies and vegetables into hearty stews. Children wore hand-me-downs until they literally fell apart, and even then, fabric might be salvaged for patches. Mothers became expert seamstresses, letting down hems and taking in waists. Jumble sales and church charity shops became treasure hunts where a good eye could spot quality. Pride meant always looking clean and presentable, even if clothes were second-hand and mended multiple times. Shoes were the worst expense, with children's feet constantly growing. Entertainment required even more ingenuity when money for luxuries barely existed. The television was often bought on hire purchase and watched communally. Libraries became sanctuaries where imagination cost nothing. Street entertainment was free children's games, watching the world go by, walking to patches of worn grass with swings. Birthdays and Christmas required months of saving, with parents secretly stashing away coins in hidden tins. At every estate's heart stood the corner shop, more social institution than business. The proprietor knew every family by name, their credit history, their troubles, dispensing both groceries and judgment in equal measure. Children were sent with handwritten lists and exact change, learning early the value of money. The shop smelled of fresh bread and paraffin heaters, with sawdust on floors and sweets in jars behind counters, displayed at child eye level like temptations. The shop window served as a community bulletin board where handwritten cards advertised everything from babysitting to second-hand prams. Lost cats and found wallets, jobs available and rooms to let, the window told the estate's story in smudged pencil. Women lingered by the bread rack, not because they couldn't decide, but because this was where you learned which families were struggling, who was expecting, who'd lost their job. For children, the corner shop represented their first taste of independence. Being trusted with a pound note to buy milk felt like a rite of passage. The penny sweets counter was paradise in miniature sherbet dips, blackjacks, fruit salads, choices agonized over with royal advisor seriousness. That corner shop was more than convenient. It was the estate's living room, kitchen table, and confessional rolled into one. Estate life bred intense community from shared struggle and inescapable proximity. When tragedy struck a family, doors opened with offers of help, ranging from child-minding to funeral contributions. Street parties appeared for royal weddings and jubilees, with tables dragged outside and bunting strung between balconies. Women organized collections for families facing hardship, discreetly passing envelopes with contributions that might be small individually but powerful collectively. Yet this closeness also fostered tensions erupting over the smallest provocations. Disputes over noise, children's behavior, or perceived slights could escalate into feuds lasting generations. The thin walls broadcasting arguments created involuntary intimacy, breeding resentment. Competition simmered beneath the surface, whose children did better in school, who could afford new furniture, who'd been allocated a better flat. Different blocks developed distinct identities and reputations, with rivalries that seemed absurd to outsiders but felt vital to residents. Youth from different estates eyed each other suspiciously, with territorial disputes occasionally flaring into fights. The estate was simultaneously your protection and your prison, your community and your burden. You defended it fiercely against outside criticism while privately acknowledging its flaws. The journey to school mapped the estate's social geography, children travelling in packs, shifting and reforming based on childhood politics. Uniforms were the great equalizer, hiding differences beneath identical blazers and ties, though the quality-conscious could still spot second-hand from new. Teachers at local comprehensives faced classrooms full of estate children, bringing their own challenges and potential. Some teachers recognized talent beneath rough accents and saw potential where others saw problems. The 11+ examination hung over childhoods like Judgment Day, determining futures with a test supposedly measuring intelligence, but often measuring preparation and circumstance. Passing meant grammar school and possibilities extending beyond the estate's boundaries, a ticket to somewhere else entirely. Failing meant secondary modern, which wasn't supposed to be lesser, but somehow felt that way. Parents who'd left school at 14 struggled to help with homework, their own education cut short by wars and economic necessity. For most estate children, school was something to endure before finding work and earning. The clever ones who stayed in education became sources of pride and sometimes quiet resentment. Dreams were tempered by reality. Early on the estates you learned not to want things that seemed impossible, to set sights on achievable goals. Yet some dreamed anyway, imagining futures extending beyond the estate's boundaries. The first signs of decline appeared: subtly chipped paint going unrepaired, broken lights staying dark. Maintenance budgets shrank as political priorities shifted, and estates built with such hope started showing their age. Lifts broke down more frequently and stayed broken longer, forcing residents to climb stairs in darkness. Graffiti appeared and remained, walls absorbing anger and boredom. The promise of modernity revealed its expiration date as concrete cracked and metal corroded. Social problems that had always existed found more visible expression as unemployment rose. Industries employing estate fathers began closing, factories shuttering, and leaving men without purpose or income. Young people faced futures bleaker than their parents' past, apprenticeships disappearing and opportunities shrinking. The estates became holding pens for economic irrelevance, visible markers of a working class losing its work. Crime increased noticeably, with desperation and boredom combining into volatile combinations. The sense of community defining estate life began fraying as people who could afford to leave did exactly that. Flats that had housed hopeful families became temporary accommodation for the most vulnerable. The right to buy scheme created new divisions between owners and renters. Those who remained watched their homes become synonymous with failure in the popular imagination, media stories focusing on problems rather than people. When did decline begin? Growing up meant eventually leaving, whether physically or mentally. The estate's hold loosening as opportunities pulled you elsewhere. Some left for university, their accents marking them as other in middle-class spaces. Others left for jobs in different cities, following work as their parents had followed the promise of council housing. Marriage meant moving to new estates or, if you'd done well, to private housing that felt like achievement and betrayal simultaneously. Returning for visits meant seeing the place with dual vision, simultaneously the home that formed you and a place you'd outgrown. The estate seemed both smaller and larger than memory held it, details sharp, while the overall impression felt faded. Childhood landmarks remained but transformed the corner shop under new ownership or closed entirely, playground equipment rusty and dangerous. Old neighbors greeted you warmly but differently, seeing the person you'd become rather than the child you'd been. For those who stayed, watching others leave created its own particular ache, a reminder of paths not taken. They became the estate's memory keepers, maintaining connections and traditions as the place continued changing. The estate kids who stayed carried different burdens than those who left. Yet many found meaning there, raising their own children in the same buildings, creating new memories in familiar spaces. The British council estates were never perfect, but they housed millions of families who built communities and created memories in spaces that society often dismissed. Growing up on an estate meant learning resilience and resourcefulness, understanding community and conflict, navigating between aspiration and acceptance in ways that shaped who you became. Those concrete landscapes weren't just buildings, they were the backdrop to ordinary lives lived with extraordinary determination, and for everyone who called them home, the estate remained a part of their story forever. If you enjoyed this journey through council estate memories, don't forget to subscribe for more nostalgic stories from Britain's past.